Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, CFL Week 2 edition of the show. It's Ian Cameron with you. It's a little bit later of a recording than expected. There was a StreamYard outage, believe it or not, earlier today on the day of this recording. So it's pushed everything back a little bit. So we're going to go quick through this show. It'll be a short show this week. To be honest with you, I don't always love talking about Week 2 in the CFL because it's always that week where you just have that one game of sample size for every team, except, of course, Winnipeg, who didn't play last week. They'll be playing their first game of the season against BC here in Week 2. But for every other team, you really only have just one piece of data as to how they look, whether it's good or bad. And you still don't have really the best, I guess you could say, gauge of how well the teams, how good the teams are. You try your best to have a good assumption and a good assessment of where these teams are at after one game and which teams you think could carry over and sustain the success if they had it, which ones maybe regress a little bit, and then conversely, the teams that struggled, who's going to keep struggling and who might improve after struggling in week one. So it's always that week where it's reading based on what happened in the one game. We'll do our best with that. So let's jump right into it. It was a barely profitable week one, but it was a profitable week one overall. We had good and bad on Saturday, but it was the Montreal bets and Saskatchewan that pushed us into profit for week one. And of course, we cashed a best bet winner last week in the week one edition of the show for the CFL season with Montreal team total over. Very, very good to see that come through. So let's see if we can build on that. Let's get right into it. We will begin with the first game of week 2 on Thursday night. It's the BC Lions and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. We've got BC 3.5-point road favorites, 47 the total. BC opened 2.5. It's gone up to 3.5. I'm even seeing 4 in some spots. And the total's been bet down from 49.5 to 47. I think the total being bet down and people coming in on the under is directly related to Chris Streveler starting at quarterback for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers instead of Zach Collaros due to his suspension. People expecting more of a run-heavy game plan, conservative as far as throwing the football, because that is not Chris Streveler's strength or his specialty. Ground and pound, quarterback runs, relying on your most outstanding player, running back, Brady Oliveira, and just kind of a ground and pound offensive game plan here for Winnipeg, who, by the way, is no longer has the services of Buck Pierce as their offensive coordinator. He's actually returning to Winnipeg on the other side now as new head coach of the BC Lions. So very interesting to see how that dynamic plays out here for this game. But I'm sure when you look at the BC situation, I don't want to say this is an advantage BC that win one for the Gipper, but I'm sure the Lions fans are acutely aware that Buck Pierce is going back to the place where he had a lot of success as an offensive coordinator. And you always want to try to get your new head coach, a win, against his old team. And not that that's going to be the difference in the game, but certainly I'd expect a good effort from BC. BC offensively could not have played better against Edmonton in their week 1 win. I thought Nathan Rourke looked like the vintage classic Nathan Rourke of old. He was slinging the ball everywhere, pinpoint accuracy, making all the right decisions, using his athleticism and his mobility to run with the football when needed. He was just doing everything. I thought he was in complete control of the offense for BC against Edmonton. And if that continues here, you look at Winnipeg, they're getting a little bit older on the defensive side of the ball. Willie Jefferson, still a great pass rusher, but not getting younger. We're seeing a team that's got a couple of new faces on the D-line. The linebacking core no longer has the veteran Adam Bighill. They've got some new faces there, although it's a pretty good, solid unit. But the biggest concern for me for Winnipeg is the secondary. They were kind of gutted in the offseason as far as the secondary, losing multiple starters, including DeMario Houston, including Tyrell Ford, who was one of the best corners in the CFL last year. He's now in Edmonton playing with his brother, Trey Ford. So Winnipeg is kind of rebuilding, retooling a little bit in the secondary. That could be some trouble here with BC and that passing game looking so strong last week. Nathan Rourke finding Keon Hatcher and Justin McInnes and Javon Catoy, Aiden Eberhardt, and how about Barry Hill, who really came onto the scene last week for BC with a couple of big grabs for touchdowns for the BC Lions in that game. So I'm worried about that Winnipeg secondary a little bit. Now, on the flip side, I don't like the spot for BC. Short week, played Saturday at home. Now you're traveling on a short week and playing on Thursday night. That is certainly an advantage for Winnipeg, scheduling-wise and situationally. I'm going to get cute here with this game, and I'm going to attack this game from both sides. I took Winnipeg once it got to 3.5 plus the points, but I'm also on BC team total instead of obviously I don't want to lay more than a field goal in this spot, but I did take BC team total over 25.5. I think last year these teams played in June. It was a 26-23 win for BC in Winnipeg early in the season. Now, that was not Nathan Rourke. That was still Vernon Adams. That was when Nathan Rourke was still not with the team. He was still, experiencing his NFL, trying to get into the NFL, his tryouts there. So he wasn't with the Lions. That was a Vernon Adams start. And it was obviously a Zach Collaro start for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. These are two different quarterbacks here, but BC came out strong. Winnipeg started slow last year. They ended up losing by 3 at home against BC. 26-23 tonight for BC means I'd win both of these bets. BC team total over 25.5 and the plus 3.5 on Winnipeg. I think it could be a field goal game. Keep in mind, even though I've got concerns about Strevler, he's been with this team for a while. He knows the personnel. I don't think he's going to be a deer in the headlights. Now, is he going to light it up? I'd be surprised, but I don't think he's going to be inept either, running the show at quarterback here for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So I'm getting cute with this a little bit, but I think there's a chance I can hit both of these. I really do like BC team total over 25.5. I think they can get 26. Scored 31 last week. They could have easily had 42. Remember, they got stopped on downs at the 1-yard line, and they got stopped on downs in another drive, but they were just moving that ball all game long. And I do worry about that Bombers secondary and the new faces and a bit of the inexperience we're going to see there in that pass defense against this pretty good passing game. So that's the way I'm going to approach that one. Let's move on to Friday night. Friday night football tonight. Montreal Alouettes, Ottawa Redblacks. Montreal opened pick'em -1. And now we see Montreal 4.5-point road favorites, 46 the total. This is in direct response to the absence of Drew Brown, quarterback for the Ottawa Redblacks, who's been ruled out for this game. Matthew Schultz will get the start. This is no disrespect to Matthew Schultz, capable journeyman backup quarterback in the league, but he's not as good as Drew Brown. He certainly doesn't have the arm strength of Drew Brown. I don't know if he's got the quite the athleticism of Drew Brown. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Matthew Schultz can move. That is one of his attributes, but certainly I don't think has the arm accuracy or strength that Drew Brown does. And we saw Drew Brown. He wasn't the reason Ottawa lost last week. He played very well. He had over 400 passing yards, despite the loss for the Ottawa Redblacks to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. This definitely hurts the offense, which to me is the clear strength of the team. We saw last week William Stanback make some more of a. They're capable now of running the ball, which was a big problem for them last year. They do have some talent at receiver. There's no denying that. Justin Hardy, Braylon Addison, Khalil Pimpleton, of course, Geno Lewis, the veteran, brought in. No shortage of weapons here for Ottawa. But now you take Drew Brown out due to injury and you put Matthew Schultz in there. It is a bit of a downgrade. Now, he is playing against his old team, and I'm sure that'll fire up Matthew Schultz because he used to be once upon a time with the Montreal Alouettes. But still, I do worry about this quarterback downgrade for them. Montreal was our best bet last week. Team total over against Toronto. We cashed it. I mentioned in the preview show that I like Montreal to win the East, to represent the East in the Grey Cup. And I think Toronto will get better as the season goes on. But even when Toronto gets Kelly back and their defense gets a little bit more experience under them, I still think Montreal could be the better team of those two. And I definitely think they're the best team on paper in the East Division. I think they're loaded on defense. They've got a good secondary, good linebacking core. They can get enough of a pass rush. They are excellent stopping the run. Not many weaknesses on that side of the ball, and a great coordinator in Noel Thorpe. And then you look at the offense. I'm a believer in Davis Alexander. I think he's ready for this opportunity. Dual threat. He can throw. He can run. Makes good reads. He takes care of the football. That's another thing, too. No turnovers last week for Montreal. And I know Davis Alexander was very, very happy about that. And that's his goal every week. Don't put the ball in harm's way. And he did a good job of that last week against Toronto. They have a good enough run game. Look, they cut Walter Fletcher, which says all you need to know. They feel good about their run game. They like Sean Thomas Erlington. They like, obviously, behind him, Travis Tice and Stevie Scott as well. So I don't worry about the running back group. And they're loaded at receiver. There's nothing else to say. I mean, you look at this receiving core, it's just one quality weapon after another for Davis Alexander to work with. I mean, there's no issues about lack of pass catchers on this team. It's a pretty impressive ensemble. When you think about it. When you think about Austin Mack, who's now back from the NFL stint and healthy, Tyson Philpott, Charleston Rambo, Tyler Snead, Cole Speaker. You got lots to work with here if you're Davis Alexander. This has been ownage in this series. Montreal 8-0 straight up, 7-1 against the spread versus Ottawa in the last 8 meetings. In just the meetings alone between Jason Moss as Alouettes head coach and Bob Dice as Red Blacks head coach, Montreal 7-0 straight up, 6-1 against the spread in those games. With the line move, I think you can kind of tell with this line move in 3.5 points. I was part of that line move. I did take Montreal money line early in the week. Now it's just a question, and I thought it was best bet material early in the week as well. Not now because of the move, but certainly I do think Montreal is the better of these two teams. And I do think they win this game. Ottawa was better at home last year, much better at home than they were on the road. But without Drew Brown, I didn't like what I saw from their defense. Trevor Harris carved them up. Saskatchewan went up and down the field for a good part of that game last week. I think Montreal gets it done. Just a question now of do you want to take the bad number? I don't usually like doing that. I certainly don't like recommending doing that. But I don't know if there's a number that would get me to want to middle this game. Not yet anyway. We'll see. But I do think Montreal gets the job done. Maybe if this hits 6, I don't think it will, but then maybe I'd have to, at that point, grab a little Ottawa plus points on the buyback, but not really rushing to do that. Montreal has really dominated this team over the years, and it wouldn't shock me to see that domination continue here on Friday Night Football. All right, let's turn to Saturday. We've got Calgary and, by the way, this total's down to 46. I get it because of no Drew Brown. But I'd lean maybe over in this game at 46. That's a low total for a CFL game. Schultz can run a little bit. I don't think he's going to move the ball a ton. This is a really good Montreal defense. I think Montreal can move the ball, though, on Ottawa. And you could always get a situation where if Ottawa's up or Montreal's up like 28-13 late in the game, maybe they give up a garbage touchdown. 28-20 final, something like that. They let their foot off the gas pedal, which often happens when a team has a multi-possession lead late in the game. So I just think now if you're going to bet the total, it's over or pass at 46. It's just moved too much because this was at 49.5. I'm even seeing 45.5 in some spots. So it's just moved too much. Calgary, Toronto. We've got Toronto 1.5 point home favorites, 50.5 the total. This is going to be the Grey Cup banner day. This is going to be the ring ceremony day for the Grey Cup championship for the Toronto Argonauts. And they're going to have to hope that is part of the puzzle to lead them to have a better performance this week because they got completely dominated by the Montreal Alouettes in all phases, special teams, and especially offense and defense. The defense, talked about it in the last week, defensive line, rebuilt, secondary, rebuilt, new starters in both position groups, and it looked like it. Montreal ran the football down Toronto's throat, couldn't stop the run. The secondary gave up some big passing plays, including the one early in the game, Davis Alexander. How do you leave the best receiver on Montreal? Arguably, they have a bunch of great receivers, but how do you leave Tyson Philpott open like that? Part of the issue is Toronto's got new faces in the secondary, breakdowns, miscommunication. That can all lead to it. So these are all concerns, in my opinion, here for Toronto on defense. The offense was what was kind of surprising to me because I did expect, there's a guy that was great in the Grey Cup last year in the place of an injured Chad Kelly, talking about Nick Arbuckle. He was terrible last week. The whole offense was horrific. It's crazy to see a team coached by Ryan Dinwiddie, who's a good offensive mind, have that bad of an offensive showing. But I would expect Toronto to be better just based on the fact that you're going from playing Montreal's defense on the road to now back home, chance to make corrections, make adjustments, and you're playing a Calgary defense that, let's put it this way, I'm not sold on them. I know they beat Hamilton last week, but they outscored Hamilton. It's not necessarily that they played a terrific defensive game on that side of the football. I still think with 75% of the defense for Calgary 75% roster turnover on defense from last year. A lot of new faces. I think this is the game where they could get not exposed, but I think they could struggle. And he's a good offensive-minded head coach, Ryan Dinwiddie. And we know Nick Arbuckle is capable to play a decent game. We saw it in the Grey Cup against a good Winnipeg team. So I think it's a buy low type of situation here for the Argos offense to be better, because I just think Calgary's defense you can't compare it to Montreal's. I think they're inferior to Montreal on that side of the football. I like the over more than any. I don't want to bet either side. I still don't want to lay points with Toronto. Lots of changes on defense. Nick Arbuckle laying points is not appealing to me. But I don't want to jump in on Calgary just because they look good against Hamilton. A Hamilton team that's still got a lot of flaws and issues. Let's point that out too. So clear pass for me from a side perspective. I would say lean Toronto now that it's close to pick them, but I'm not getting involved. Maybe Calgary's a lot better than I thought. So I'm leaving the door open that maybe Calgary can go into Toronto and win and start the season 2-0. So I'm staying off the side. I like this game over the total. I think Toronto has a bounce-back offensive showing against a weaker defense this week. But I think, look, Vernon Adams, the 2 interceptions weren't good, but other than that, I thought he was commanding the pocket. He made some big plays. He moved his legs. He ran with the ball. And Toronto's defense is still trying to sort it out to begin the season. So I think Calgary can move the football here as well against this Argos team. And Dedrick Mills in particular, Toronto could not stop the ground game last week. So Dedrick Mills for Calgary, their running back, might have a decent day running the football. So I like over in that game, Calgary and Toronto. All right, the finale for week 2 in the CFL. We've got the Saskatchewan Roughriders taking on the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I will be there, of course, first home game of the new season at the now what's called Hamilton Stadium, no longer Tim Hortons Field. We've got Saskatchewan minus 3.5 point road favorites, 51 the total in this game. I definitely like the over in this game. You're talking about Saskatchewan. Their offense looked terrific last week with Trevor Harris picking apart Ottawa's defense. I wouldn't say Hamilton's defense as of now, until I see something different, is leaps and bounds better than Ottawa. So this was a Hamilton defense that on paper looked a lot better this year, but I've said that before about Hamilton on defense. And unfortunately, it didn't look like it last week. It looked a lot like the defense of 2024, which led the CFL in most points allowed, the Ticat defense. So still, they've got to show me improvement there. Now, Saskatchewan got a lot of injuries against Ottawa last week, but there is some good, encouraging news on the injury report for Saskatchewan. AJ Ouellette may play. Their starting running back. He got injured, of course, in that Ottawa game, didn't return. Roland Milligan, Defensive Player of the Year in the CFL last year, one of the better players in the secondary in the entire league. And you see that last week, once he left the game, Roland Milligan, due to injury, that's when Ottawa started to get their passing game going, and Saskatchewan really struggled against it. That's when Drew Brown caught fire and led Ottawa to a near comeback last week against Saskatchewan. So, but they haven't been ruled in yet. They've been practicing. Apparently they're available to play for this game, but it's going to be a true game time decision for both of them. Obviously, it would enhance Saskatchewan's chances greatly, if they do play. I think this is all line and number dependent for me from a side perspective. I think if this line was below a field goal and Saskatchewan was in a pick'em range or laying less than a field goal here, I would probably lean pretty hard to Saskatchewan, because I just think they're better than Hamilton, at least as of right now, at this stage of the season. But because they're laying 3.5, and they were laying 4 earlier in the week, it's a little tougher. And, you would expect Hamilton to play better here, home opener. The offense wasn't great either last week. We know the defense struggled, but let's be honest. The offense had their issues last week as well for the Hamilton Ticats. Bo Levi Mitchell missing throws, drop passes. There was a couple drop passes as well from the likes of Keandre Smith and even the new kid on the block, who was one of the best receivers last year, Kenny Lawler. He even dropped a pass or two. And the connection with Lawler and Mitchell in particular last week, it wasn't there. You could tell. And maybe it's going to take a couple of games to develop, but I could see back home Hamilton having a better offensive game here against Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan, even with the win against Ottawa, let's not forget, they did give up 26 points and over 400 passing yards to Ottawa. So it's not like it was a phenomenal defensive shutdown game from the Rough Riders last week. So I think Hamilton can move the ball. I definitely think Saskatchewan can. You look at series history between these teams last year. They played twice, as they always do, with them being West and East teams from separate divisions. You only play each other twice. But last year, both meetings went over the total, 2-0 to the over. The game in Hamilton was 33-30 in favor of Saskatchewan, 63 points in that game. And the other game was, 36-20. Saskatchewan, 56 points in that game. So both of those games went over. I think we see another high-scoring game here. There was some concerns about the weather for this game early in the week with rain in the forecast, maybe some wind, cool temperatures. But, temperatures won't be warm, but apparently no rain in the forecast anymore on Saturday. So we shouldn't have this game influenced by weather too much. So that should bode well for the offenses. So I'll go over the total here. 3.5, I'll give a small lean to Hamilton here. Just because, look, last year, remember that game last year at Tim Hortons Field, now, of course, being called Hamilton Stadium. Remember that last year, that game in Hamilton, the Ticats led most of the game against the Riders. In fact, they played better they were the better team for over 3 quarters last year when they hosted the Riders. And then they just collapsed down the stretch. And Saskatchewan came back. They ended up tying it. And then, of course, there was a fumble on the kickoff with about a minute left by Hamilton right after those Saskatchewan Roughriders tied the game. Saskatchewan recovered, and they were already in position to kick the game-winning Brett Lawther field goal with no time on the clock. It was a heartbreaker. It was a gut-wrenching loss. The stadium was exasperated after that game, and it ended up being a game they absolutely should have won. They ended up losing 33-30. The point I'm trying to make is that's why it's tough to lay 3.5 here. Saskatchewan probably is the better team, but I could see this being decided by a field goal. Team going on the road, team dealing with a couple of injuries as well. Hamilton, licking their chops after a tough loss last week. And here's another thing I want to throw out there about the Calgary-Hamilton result last week. That's maybe a different game, if not for what happened at the end of the first half and the beginning of the second half, when the Ticats went for, I don't know what the hell Scott Milanovic was thinking here, going for a fake punt late in the second quarter and setting Calgary up with automatic field position. And it was a 2-point game at the time. Scott, it's a 2-point game at the time. Like, take it easy, and you're on the road. Take it easy. I know you didn't play great in the half, but fake punt in your own territory, let's be honest, that's not a smart decision there. And sure enough, they weren't even close to getting it. And Calgary goes right down the field, touchdown right before halftime, and what could have been a 2-point deficit at halftime is a 9-point deficit instead. That was mistake number one. And then at the start of the second half, Hamilton forgets that you can field an onside kickoff, and with the swirling in the wind, nobody, located the football in the air for Hamilton. Calgary got on it, and they were in automatic red zone position right after recovering that kick. And they scored off it, and it totally changed the game, those 2 moments. You take those 2 moments away, it's a 2-point game and still very much a winnable game for Hamilton. But those are the moments there where I think the game got away from the Ticats with those special teams miscues and blunders and decisions that they had last week against Calgary. So that's why I think this could still be a close game. Like I said, at plus 3.5 or better, lean Hamilton. If it was below a field goal, I'd lean the other way. But I like the over more than anything there. All right, great stuff. Shout out to everyone for tuning into another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. Make sure you hit the like button. Appreciate it very much. We should have, I believe, a guest next week. We are going to have a bunch of guests. We're going to have Will Arndt once again. We got a couple other guests lined up that have connections to the CFL. Rob Vino, good friend of mine, who also handicaps the CFL. He'll be joining me one of these weeks. And we're going to get Andrew McGinnis and Bobby Dubois. We're going to get both of them on at the same time. They host their own CFL show, and we will get them on at some point as well. So very much looking forward to that as well. All right, let's wrap it up. Let's see if we can go 2-0 to start the season with best bets. And I'm going to go to the last game we talked about. Saskatchewan-Hamilton, I like over 51 is the best number out there right now. Yeah, I think it's a high-scoring game. I mean, last year, 2-0 to the over, 63 and 56 points in those games. I think Saskatchewan can move it against Trevor Harris, and if AJ Ouellette's compromised, and Kadeem Carey might be active, the guy they just signed from as a running back with the Ouellette injury, Saskatchewan. But I still think they'll throw the ball a lot. And Hamilton, I think, can bounce back offensively against Saskatchewan, which does still have a shaky secondary. Even if Milligan plays, there's some questions in the secondary outside of that. So I think both teams can have enough offensive success. So Riders, Ticats, over 51. That is going to be my best bet here for week 2 in the CFL on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. That's a wrap. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Hit the like button on the way out. I'm Ian Cameron. Enjoy CFL week 2 and good luck. And we'll be back with you next week for another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy.